Hey everyone, Michelle here, personal trainer and lifestyle coach. Today we are here to talk about our June 2024 theme of the month, the 4 main stress responses. Now the first thing that we're going to talk about is how and why we respond to stressors. Now the next few coping mechanisms that we're going to talk about are essentially automatic. They're reflexive and they're out of our control. So it's important to identify that these are things that are going to happen automatically before you're able to actually really think about or do anything about them. Now, what stressors do is that they activate 3 different parts of our brain. First is the amygdala. This is our emotional center. The hippocampus, which is our memory center, and our prefrontal cortex, which is essentially our logic center. So what stressors do is that they actually arouse the amygdala. This sends signals to our hypothalamus, which releases stress hormones and can do things like increase our heart rate, increase our breathing, and create a little bit of hypervigilance and heighten all of our senses. The next thing that it does is it actually dampens our prefrontal cortex, which again is our logic center. So this is where we might see a little bit more impulsiveness. And the last thing, which I thought was a really interesting idea, is it actually dampens activity in the hippocampus as well. Again, this is our memory center. So this can make it more difficult for us to be able to discern whether or not this is an active threat, or maybe if this is just a memory of something traumatic that might have happened that was a similar situation. Now, there are a lot of different ways that you can break down the stress or trauma responses. So what we're going to do is break it down to the 4 main responses, and we're going to say how to identify them and ways to be able to cope with each of these. So the 4 main ones are going to be our fight response, our flight response, freeze, and then the last one some people consider a category, but we'll talk about it, is the fawn response. So the first stress response is our fight response. This can also be known as an approach response, and it typically incites action. Now, the idea behind this is it can be displayed as things like grinding your teeth, tense muscles, anger, irritability. And some of the best coping mechanisms actually include doing active movement, but purposeful and mindful active movement, like exercise. Now, the second stress response is our flight response. Now, this typically displays itself in either avoidance or disengagement. And the idea is that somebody might be trying to get away from a situation. So you might see a little bit of self-isolation, non-confrontation, or maybe even using distractions like substance abuse, excessive screen time, or other work distractions in order to be able to take themselves away from the situation. Now, this can often feel like overwhelm or a desire to escape. So some of the best coping mechanisms are going to be something that keeps you grounded, like yoga or social connection. The third one is our freeze response. Now, this is actually typically connected with inaction. This is something that is thought of as the idea behind being almost in between the fight and the flight response. Or an example would be pressing the brake and the gas at the exact same time. So it's almost a hyper plus a hypo arousal at the same time. And for that reason, these people often do not do anything at all, or they avoid doing anything in order to not make the bad decision. Now, sometimes we can use this as a tool. Maybe it'll give us a second to pause and to be able to decide what the appropriate response is. But oftentimes it actually becomes debilitating instead. It can be paired with things like anxiety, indecisiveness, and procrastination. The best way to be able to cope with this is going to be doing something that engages your senses, maybe like lighting a scented candle, doing social interaction in small doses, anything that's tolerable, or to create more time and space for yourself. And then the last category that we're going to talk about is the fawn response. Now, this is one of those responses that's actually considered a social response. And there are quite a few other ones that are included. However, this is one of the primary ones, so I wanted to discuss it briefly. But the idea of the fawn response is for somebody to be overly helpful, overly agreeable, and essentially just not want to cause a stir. So oftentimes, to their own detriment, they will get rid of their own self-boundaries and do things for other people to make sure that everyone around them is happy. One of the best coping mechanisms for this is going to be something private and self-reflective, like journaling, so you can reassess what your needs and wants are. So now that we've identified what the 4 main stress responses are, the next piece is going to be identifying how you respond to different types of situations. Now, it is important to understand that it might be different in different types of situations, but what we want to do first is identify it. And then we want to find ways to be able to cope with each of these responses. If we can find positive stress coping mechanisms, then we can be better equipped in the future to be able to deal with similar situations. So keep in mind, this can be something that you can practice, that you can get better at. We are identifying and figuring out how to be able to make those decisions with our prefrontal cortex instead of our amygdala. I'm super excited to see what you guys come up with. Remember that this can be social as well. If you can start to identify the stressors for both yourself and the people around you, then you can not only communicate what you need, but also be able to help those around you. Thanks so much, and let me know if you guys have any questions.